Well, speaking of justice in other forums, there is now a question of whether trans identified individuals are trying to get more leniency from the court by essentially lying. This post and this headline coming from the Post Millennial: trans killer likely lied to judge at sentencing after getting a sweetheart plea deal from Portland DA Mike Schmidt. Joining me now is Andy No, who is a senior editor at the Post Millennial and is the one who has been following this story. So, Andy, I don't think that a lot of viewers actually have been following this. So give us kind of the background and why this is such a big issue that these trans identified individuals are basically asking for leniency in front of the court just based on their sexual identity.
So in April of 2023, there was a homicide in Portland. Portland has experienced, like many American cities, a surge in violent criminality from 2020 onward as a result of the BLM Antifa panic and movement. This homicide stood out to me because initially no place had looked into the suspect's background. I did some digging and found out that the murder suspect is a trans person. So some details. What had happened is that in April 2023, a trans person wearing a tiara and a dress got into a cab in Portland, and several minutes into the ride had plunged a blade into the neck of the driver. His name is Reese McDowell Lahan, and he died in the vehicle. I spoke with the source for my reporting last year who had watched the video and described it as the most graphic and brutal video that this individual had ever seen. So days before, the murder suspect, who had come from another part of Oregon to Portland, had allegedly threatened other people with a knife and was arrested and let go. And that's a pattern you'll see quite often, and then went on to allegedly murder. Fast forward to February of this year. The suspect, the name is Moses Lopez, was given a sweetheart plea deal by District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Now, Mike Schmidt came into office during the height of the BLM Antifa riots in his probably most infamous legacy, in addition to the surge of violence under his leadership, is that he decriminalized most riot-related crimes as Portland was burning night after night after night. Well, his office gave a sweetheart deal where the murder charge was allowed to be pleaded down to a manslaughter charge. And what's interesting is that ahead of sentencing, the manslaughter suspect said that they were having essentially a medical emergency and had called 911 for help, didn't receive any help, said that they refused to apologize for the lack of help that they desperately needed. That's the quote at the time. And so this was ahead of sentencing, and then the judge sentenced this manslaughter convict now to 22 years. But local media in Portland, KATU, and kudos to them, did some public records digging and acquired the 911 phone call made by the killer immediately after the killing, and it completely contradicted the statements made ahead of sentencing. This person made no pleas for help for 911 to come, did not say anything about having a medical or psychological emergency. And I think the fact that the trans identity is important in here is just because we see in many, many cases, not just this one, of murder suspects, homicide suspects, killers who have a transgender identity, and somehow that bringing that in during the process of ahead of a sentence, talking about, in part, it can be because they don't want to be housed in a male prison facility, and or that they want more lenient, more lenient sentence.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me, Andy, and I so appreciate your reporting on this. And for people who want to support Andy's work, you can go to his Substack page on his social media and support independent journalism. And I'm a huge advocate of that, so I want to put that out there. But for these trans-identified individuals, I mean, it seems like the entire queer theory agenda is pushing on one hand to normalize this and say, this is a great thing that all these people can be out as who they are, and this isn't a mental illness. And yet, when they commit these types of atrocities and they're in front of the court, they're looking at this almost like a mental health or mental competency defense. It seems like you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, and so there's some additional context to this homicide in that the homicide happened and other acts of violence have happened in America by non-binary and or trans suspects and killers. Is that it takes place in this context where activists and Democrat politicians are normalizing language around political violence for trans people, like encouraging it. For example, they will wear shirts that say "Protect Trans Kids," and there's an image of a knife. And there's been politicians in different Democrat cities who have worn that, and it's quite chilling considering there have been trans killers who have used knives to kill people, such as in this case. But yeah, there's this wider context of Trans Day of Vengeance, people who justify trans mass killers, even trans people, a trans shooter who killed children in Nashville. There was a memorial held for that killer by trans activists. So yeah, there's a deeper story behind just individual anecdotes of violence. It's taking place in a context of language around the normalization and legitimization of violence when it comes to certain groups that leftists are sympathetic to or supportive of.
Yeah, and Andy, I really hope that the court here is going to take into consideration whether this individual in the Portland case ended up lying to the court and wanting to engender that type of sympathy and to use the trans status as some sort of benefit. But this presents a wider question, I think, of what does justice require? I mean, it shouldn't matter whether it's a male, a female, trans-identified, whatever. Justice should be justice, and this is why we could have a whole conversation on hate crimes. But that's all the time that we have here tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at salemnewschannel.com.